My family told me I was dead to them. Then they needed me to save their multi-million-dollar secret. And then, 2 days before Christmas in 2015, I got a text from my dad that literally made me want to throw my phone through the wall. It wasn't some usual holiday message or a passive-aggressive nudge. It was a cold, brutal declaration that felt like a punch to the gut. The message said, "Don't come home for Christmas this year. We're done pretending you're part of this family. You're dead to us. Dead to us." Those words hit me harder than anything before. Who sends that to their own kid just before Christmas? Not even in a fight, just flat out cutting me off like I never existed. Our family had been tense ever since Jordan and I broke up last year. They never liked her from the start, and after our divorce, things only got worse. My parents didn't approve of Jordan, and worse, they barely acknowledged our son Mason for years. Mason's 8 now, but when he was little, they treated him like some kind of inconvenience. I guess none of that was enough for them because this text was a new, twisted level of cruelty. I stared at the screen in disbelief, my mind racing through 1,000 questions. How could they say this? How could they turn their backs on me and my boy like that? I didn't tell Mason about the text because he was so excited for Christmas. He had wrapped tiny gifts for everyone, using his own allowance to buy and prepare them. Mason kept asking if Grandma would make his favorite cookies, and his little face was lit up with hope. I almost wanted to believe maybe my parents wouldn't be monsters in front of him, that they might put on a show of normal family warmth for the neighbors. So I decided we'd show up. Maybe they'd surprise me. Maybe they'd surprise Mason. But I was wrong. We drove the 2 hours from our apartment in the city to my parents' house in the suburbs. Mason was practically bouncing in his seat, talking nonstop about the presents he made and the cookies he hoped for. I gripped the steering wheel tight, trying to hold myself together because part of me wanted to turn the car around and never look back. But Mason's excitement kept me going. I promised him a nice Christmas, and I intended to keep that promise. When we pulled into the driveway, I saw the familiar cars of my siblings parked outside, the BMW of my sister Caroline, my brother Jason's Jeep, the whole family inside without us. I felt a cold pit settle in my stomach. Mason clutched his little bag of gifts, and I grabbed the presents I brought for the family. We walked up to the front door, the snow crunching beneath our feet, and my mom swung it open. The look on her face was a mixture of anger and disgust I'll never forget. She didn't even hesitate. I said no. Get off my property. Her voice was sharp and cold like winter air. Then she saw Mason standing there beside me, and her expression twisted into something worse. "And you brought him? How dare you?" I could hear my siblings laughing from inside, like they were watching a show. I tried to explain that Mason just wanted to see everyone for Christmas, that he didn't know about the feud. But they weren't listening. Before I could say more, my brother Jason came storming to the door. Without warning, he threw a half-full beer can at me. It splashed all over my jacket, cold and sticky, and he was shouting, "Security, we have an intruder. Someone call 911. It was like a sick joke to them. Mason grabbed my hand tighter, trembling, his little body shaking. Then my dad appeared behind Jason, holding a baseball bat. Yes, a real bat. Dad started yelling, spewing insults about how I was 29 years old, unemployed, and a total failure who couldn't even pay child support on time. I wanted to scream, but I kept my voice steady. I lost my job in October and missed one payment that I made up the next month. One missed payment after all the years I worked to provide for Mason. That didn't matter to him. At the same time, my mom was screaming at Mason, telling him his dad was a loser, the reason his mom left. It was like watching a nightmare unfold in slow motion. My uncle, Dad's brother, joined in, laughing and calling Jordan a druggie, which was a flat-out lie. Jordan had some struggles years ago, but she'd been clean for a long time. My mom grabbed the gifts Mason and I had brought, threw them in the snow, and stomped on some of them. She yelled for me to take the dollar store trash back and said Mason deserved a real father, not me. That was the moment Mason started crying. His small face crumpled with confusion and hurt. Then Dad pointed at Mason and said he'd grow up to be a nobody just like me. The neighbors had come out on their porches by this point, some pulling out phones to record. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. The most humiliating moment of my entire life was playing out for the whole neighborhood to see. Dad's final words before I walked away still ring in my ears. "Don't come back until you stop being an embarrassment. Actually, don't come back at all. You're not my son." I smiled, took Mason's hand, and told them, "You're going to regret this." I didn't know if I was trying to promise myself or them, but I said it. Mason was sobbing in the car, asking what he did wrong. I had to pull over because I couldn't see through the tears. I told him that none of this was his fault, and that sometimes people are just cruel for no reason. That grandma and grandpa were being mean people, and that we'd be okay. I wasn't sure if I believed it, but I had to tell him something. Looking back, my family had always made me feel like I wasn't enough. My brother was the star athlete, the one everyone cheered for. My sister was the genius with perfect grades and bright futures. And me? I was the disappointment, the one who never quite fit their mold. When I didn't get into the colleges they wanted, they made me feel like I was broken. When I started dating Jordan, they called her trash because she didn't come from money. They looked down on me my entire life. After the divorce, the coldness turned to outright hostility. I moved into a smaller place and had to rebuild my life from scratch. I see Mason every weekend and even some weekdays. I work my ass off to give him the best I can, but because I'm not making six figures like my siblings, I'm the family failure. That Christmas was just the latest brutal reminder of how little they cared about me or my son. A week after that nightmare, my phone exploded with missed calls and messages. 45 desperate texts, 67 missed calls, and voicemails filled with crying and begging. Apparently, they suddenly needed something only I could give them. I haven't answered a single one yet. I listened to one voicemail where my dad actually sounded scared. Let them panic. Let them wonder what I'm planning. I've been saving screenshots, recording voicemails, and making a plan. They want to treat me and Mason like garbage. Fine. But actions have consequences, and I'm ready to make them face every single one. After that brutal Christmas, I spent days trying to process everything that had happened, but the chaos only kept growing. My phone was blowing up with frantic calls and texts from my parents and siblings, all begging for some kind of contact, some sign that I'd respond. I ignored every single one. I wasn't about to let them think I was desperate or weak, not after everything. But still, I couldn't help but wonder what they could possibly want so badly that they'd go from cutting me off completely to begging for a conversation. That's when I got a message from my cousin Danny. We weren't close, not by a long shot, but he'd always been the one family member who treated me like a human being instead of a punching bag. Danny asked if we could meet for lunch, said he had something important to tell me. I was suspicious, honestly. I wasn't sure if this was some kind of trap or family ambush, but something told me Danny wouldn't be part of that, so I agreed. We met at this greasy diner near my apartment, the kind of place that smelled like burnt coffee and old grease, but it felt neutral enough for a serious conversation. As soon as we sat down, Danny slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a copy of my grandfather's will. I stared at it, confused. What's this got to do with anything? I asked. Danny nodded toward a page deep inside and told me to read paragraph 2 of page 4. I did, and what I read hit me like a truck. My grandfather, who died 5 years ago, left the family's lake house in a trust with a very specific condition. The property couldn't be sold unless all grandchildren signed off on the deal once they turned 31. I was turning 31 in just a couple of months. The kicker? My parents were trying to sell the lake house. They already had a buyer lined up, some developer offering millions, way above market price. But they needed my signature to make it happen. I sat there in the diner, the weight of it sinking in. After years of them treating me like I didn't exist, humiliating me and my son, they suddenly needed me. The same people who called me a loser, who laughed at Jordan and me, now needed my consent to cash in on a payday. It was the ultimate leverage, and it made me sick. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a strange kind of power. I wasn't just the family disappointment anymore. I was the key. I drove straight to Jordan's place to pick up Mason for our weekend. Mason was bouncing around, happy as always, but I could tell something was weighing on me. Jordan asked what was wrong, and for the first time, I told her everything. The Christmas nightmare, the text from my dad, the desperate calls, and the lake house scheme. Her face went tight with anger, fiercer than I'd ever seen. She told me I didn't have to deal with their bullshit alone and suggested I talk to her brother, Ethan, who worked in real estate law. I hesitated, but she was adamant. Monday morning, I called Ethan. He listened carefully as I explained the situation, and his voice grew serious. He told me I had more power than I realized. Not only could I refuse to sign off on the sale, but the trust had strict provisions requiring that all beneficiaries have access to the property. My parents had been illegally changing locks and codes to keep me out for years. That was a violation of the trust and possibly illegal. He also told me about a trust fund that had been set up for Mason when he was born, something my parents had kept hidden from me for 7 years. I couldn't believe it. While they called me a deadbeat and dragged me through the mud, they were hiding money that belonged to my son. Ethan said I had every right to demand full information and access to that fund immediately. I felt a mix of rage and relief. Finally, proof that they were lying and scheming behind my back. I called my dad, deciding to confront him head on. His voice was surprisingly cheerful when I answered, like nothing had happened. He tried the usual act, talking about family and the importance of working together. I let him run for about 30 seconds before cutting him off. I told him I knew about the lake house sale, about the trust, and the hidden money from Mason. There was a long pause, then his tone shifted. He started explaining it was a family decision and how the money would be used to set up college funds for all the grandchildren. I asked if Mason's name was included or if he was still the kid with no future, a cruel nickname my dad used in his native language when he was mad. That shut him up. Then he tried to bribe me, offering $50,000 in cash if I signed the papers right away. I laughed and told him I'd think about it. He bumped the offer up to $75,000, but I wasn't impressed. I hung up before he could say more. Within minutes, my phone blew up with messages from my siblings. Caroline texted me to call off this selfish act and think about family loyalty. Jason sent a long message about how I was tearing the family apart. Rich, coming from the guy who threw a beer can at me in front of Mason. The next day, I got a group text from my mom inviting the entire family to a special dinner to heal the rift. It was rich coming from her after everything. But I decided to go, not to make peace, but to face them all directly. When Saturday arrived, I showed up at my parents' house alone. Mason was at a friend's birthday party, and there was no way I was dragging him back there. The house was packed, my parents, siblings, uncles, cousins, everyone acting like nothing had happened. My mom immediately asked where Mason was, trying to play the concerned grandmother, but I told her the truth. He was with friends, and after what happened, there was no way I'd bring him back. My dad made a big speech about family, forgiveness, and moving forward together. My mom brought out a folder with the lake house sale documents and started praising the deal as a wonderful opportunity for all of us. That's when I stood up, pulled out my phone, and played the recordings of their Christmas rant. The room went silent. I passed around copies of the will, pointing out the part about equal access to the property, and asked why I had been locked out for years. My dad sputtered and tried to explain it away as misunderstandings. My uncle told me to let bygones be bygones, but I reminded him that he called Jordan a drug addict in front of my son just weeks ago. Then I laid down my terms. A full written apology to me and Mason, my fair share of the lake house sale as defined by the will, not their lowball offer, and a college fund for Mason equal to those of my siblings' kids. My brother lost it. He stood up, knocked over his chair, and called me an extortionist. My dad told him to shut up, and in that moment, I knew I had them where I wanted. I left without signing anything and told them to contact me when they were ready to meet my terms. As I walked out, my mom grabbed my arm, digging her nails in and begging me not to destroy the family. I pulled away and reminded her that it was her who destroyed it that Christmas. The texts and calls didn't stop. My dad's business partner even reached out, saying they had spent money based on the expected sale and needed me to sign quickly. My sister's husband cornered me at the grocery store, telling me to be reasonable. I blocked most of them, but kept saving the voicemails, each one more desperate than the last. Yesterday, my dad admitted they were in financial trouble and that the sale was their only way out. Their perfect lives weren't so perfect after all, and now they needed the family disappointment to bail them out. The deadline is closing in, and they're panicking. Honestly, it feels damn good knowing I hold the cards for once. This isn't just about money anymore. It's about respect, truth, and finally standing up for myself and Mason. And this is only the beginning. The tension kept building as the days passed, and the family's desperation became more obvious with every call and text I ignored. Despite all their pleas and guilt trips, I knew I couldn't let them bully me into giving up what was rightfully mine and what belonged to Mason. The lake house sale was more than just money. It was years of disrespect and lies wrapped up in a fancy deal that they hoped I would sign blindly. I wasn't about to be their doormat anymore. That Saturday, I walked into the family dinner alone, knowing full well it would be one of the tensest nights of my life. The house was packed with relatives, from my parents and siblings to aunts, uncles, and even some cousins I barely knew. Everyone was trying to act like nothing had happened, like the Christmas disaster was just a bad dream we'd all forget. But I wasn't there to forget. I was there to face them and to make sure they understood that I wasn't going away quietly. My mom was the first to speak, tears in her eyes as she begged me to stop tearing the family apart. She said she just wanted what was best for me, but her words felt hollow after everything. My dad followed, delivering a speech about family unity, the importance of forgiveness, and how the lake house sale was going to benefit all of us. It was the same story they'd been feeding everyone since the rumors started. One big, happy family coming together for the greater good. My siblings chimed in, talking about their plans for the money. Caroline wanted to use her share for a new vacation home, while Jason bragged about the college funds he'd set up for his kids. I sat quietly, listening, while they painted a picture of what they stood to gain. But I wasn't impressed or moved. They had no right to lecture me about loyalty when they were the ones who had thrown me out in the cold. Finally, my dad looked directly at me and asked what I had to say for myself. I stood up, connected my phone to the TV, and hit play on the recording from Christmas. Every cruel word, every insult, every moment of humiliation filled the room. The laughter, the beer can, the baseball bat. It was all there for everyone to see and hear. The room fell silent. Even the most hardened relatives couldn't deny the cruelty in those moments. Then, I pulled out the copies of the will and passed them around. I pointed to the section about equal access and the requirement for all grandchildren to approve the sale. I asked why I had been locked out for years and why Mason's name had been hidden from any financial documents. My dad's face twisted, and he stammered about misunderstandings and family disagreements, but no one was buying it anymore. My uncle tried to smooth things over, telling everyone to let bygones be bygones. But I reminded him of his own cruel words when he called Jordan a drug addict in front of Mason just weeks ago. The room tensed, and I could see the guilt flicker in some eyes, but my brother exploded. He knocked over his chair and accused me of extortion, calling me selfish and greedy. My dad shushed him, and in that moment, I knew I had them cornered. I told them my terms. A formal written apology to me and Mason for the years of disrespect, my fair share of the lake house sale as dictated by the will, not some lowball offer, and a college fund for Mason equal to what my siblings' kids were getting. I made it clear I wasn't interested in tearing the family apart. I just wanted what was right. My mom's reaction was almost desperate. She grabbed my arm, nails digging in as she begged me not to destroy everything. I pulled away and reminded her it was her family's cruelty on Christmas that had done the damage, not me. The room was thick with tension, and I left without signing anything, telling them to contact me when they were ready to meet my terms. The calls and texts didn't stop after that night. My parents' desperation became even more apparent, with my dad's business partner reaching out to explain that they'd already spent money based on the sale and needed me to act quickly. I was cornered in the grocery store parking lot by my sister's husband, who lectured me about family loyalty and reasonableness. I kept my distance, blocking most of them, but saving all the messages as evidence. The real turning point came when I publicly confronted my parents at their country club during Sunday brunch, the one place they cared more about their image than anything else. I walked right up to their usual table, documents in hand, and dropped the Christmas text and the formal letter demanding access to Mason's trust fund on the table in front of their shocked friends. My dad's face went pale, and my mom looked like she might faint. They tried to drag me away quietly, but I refused to be silenced. I told everyone at the table, loud enough to be heard, that I was still waiting for my parents to come clean about the lake house, the trust fund, and all the secrets they'd been hiding. The country club manager came over, clearly wondering if I needed to be escorted out, but my dad quickly lied that it was a private family matter. The damage was done. Their carefully maintained facade cracked in front of their social circle, and I left knowing I'd shaken their perfect little world. That night, my brother showed up at my apartment, pounding on the door and yelling about how I was destroying the family. I didn't open it. Instead, I recorded his meltdown through the door and called building security. The next morning, my dad emailed me information about Mason's trust fund, suddenly willing to transfer control to me. I knew it was a calculated move, trying to separate the issues to weaken my position on the lake house sale. I didn't respond. Instead, I contacted the real estate agent handling the sale directly and introduced myself as a legal owner of the property. The agent was hesitant at first, but once I mentioned potential legal complications if the sale proceeded without my full disclosure, she quickly changed her tune. Within hours, I had the full sale contract in my inbox, and what I saw confirmed my suspicions. The buyer wasn't some random rich guy looking for a vacation home. It was a major development company planning to build a luxury resort, and the sale price was nearly triple what my parents had let on. I forwarded everything to Ethan, who confirmed that my parents had been planning to lowball me, probably offering me less than half of what I was entitled to. Armed with this, I sent a single text to my dad. I know about the developer. I know the real price. The clock is ticking on February 15th. His response was a mix of threats and pleas. warning me I'd regret this when I needed them someday. I laughed at the irony, knowing full well they were the ones who'd need me. The next day, my mom showed up at my workplace, tears streaming down her face, causing such a scene that my supervisor had to ask her to leave. She begged, crying about how they might lose their house, how my dad's business partners were threatening legal action, and how my siblings' kids would be left without college funds if the sale fell through. I looked at her and told her she should have thought about that before telling Mason I was a loser, before throwing our Christmas presents in the snow, and before treating me like garbage for years. She tried to grab my arm, but I stepped back and told her this wasn't one bad day. It was years of disrespect and lies. When she realized I wasn't backing down, her tone shifted. She accused me of being selfish, difficult, and blamed Jordan for leaving me. I just smiled and walked away. That's when I started to understand something deeper. My uncle, the one who called Jordan a drug addict in front of Mason, tried to play peacemaker and suggested we all needed to move forward. I asked if he regretted calling Jordan that name in front of my son. He stammered something about being drunk, and I hung up. The deadline loomed 10 days away. My parents were more desperate by the hour, suddenly willing to meet all my original demands. But after everything, I wasn't sure if that was enough anymore. This was never just about money. It was about years of being the family scapegoat, about them humiliating me and my son, about hiding money meant for Mason. I had scheduled a meeting with the developer without telling my parents, and I wasn't sure what I would do next. But one thing was certain. They were about to learn that the son they'd spent years looking down on was holding all the cards now, and I was done playing their game. The day I walked into that sleek downtown office building for the meeting with the developers, I felt a mix of nerves and determination unlike anything I'd experienced before. I was surrounded by people in expensive suits, all polished and professional, while I stood there in my usual worn clothes, feeling like an outsider in their world. The receptionist gave me a look that said, "What are you doing here?" But the moment I mentioned my name, everything changed. Suddenly, I wasn't just some random guy anymore. I was a key player in a multi-million-dollar deal. They led me into a conference room where 3 executives sat waiting. The main guy, Roberts, started with a straightforward question. "Are you here representing your family?" I shook my head and told him no, that I was there on my own behalf, and that my parents had no idea I was meeting with them. The room went quiet for a moment, the weight of what I was about to say hanging in the air. Roberts asked me what I wanted, and I laid it all out without hesitation. I told him about the way my family had treated me and Mason, about the hidden trust fund, the locked doors, and the humiliations from Christmas. I showed them the recordings of the rant, the texts from my siblings, and the legal documents that proved my case. Instead of recoiling, Roberts seemed impressed, saying he hadn't realized there were so many internal family complications. They'd been dealing exclusively with my dad, who painted a very different picture. When Roberts asked if I was there to block the sale, I dropped my bombshell. I wasn't against selling the property at all. I just wanted to negotiate directly with the development company, not through my parents. I explained how the sale was essential to them, but only if all signatures were in by the deadline, or they'd lose the deal and move on to a backup location. I asked what it would take for me to sign off. I didn't ask for a bigger payout. Instead, I made 3 demands. First, that my share of the sale be paid directly to me, not funneled through my parents. Second, that the development include a small memorial honoring my grandfather, whose land this was. And third, that the resort be named after my son, Mason. Roberts laughed when I asked for naming rights instead of cash, but said he respected my straightforwardness. After some back and forth, they agreed to my terms and even offered me a small ownership stake in the final development. They had their legal team draft paperwork on the spot, and I signed a preliminary agreement before leaving. On the drive home, my phone buzzed nonstop. Somehow, my dad had found out about the meeting, probably from someone on the development team, and his texts went from confused to panicked to furious within minutes. I didn't respond. The next morning, I got an official email from the development company confirming our agreement and that they'd informed my parents of the changes. Less than an hour later, my dad showed up at my apartment, pounding on the door like a man possessed. I opened it, and he tried to push his way inside, red-faced and shaking with rage. He accused me of going behind their backs, stealing from the family, and proving I'd always been selfish. I blocked the doorway and told him he wasn't welcome inside. He shouted about how they'd raised me, paid for my education, and given me everything. I reminded him that 2 months ago, he told me I wasn't his son anymore. He tried to soften his tone, saying my mom was devastated and might need hospitalization from stress. I asked if she was too stressed to remember calling Mason a mervek on Christmas, a cruel word in their native language. That shut him up for a moment, but then he resorted to threats. He said they'd contest the deal, sue me, and make sure everyone knew what an ungrateful son I was. I held up my phone and told him I had recordings of everything. His words, the abuse, the way they treated Mason. Did he really want a judge to hear it all? He tried bribing me again, offering to split their share with me if I tore up the agreement. But it was too little, too late. Before storming off, he said something that finally made sense of years of pain. I was just like my mother's brother, stubborn and difficult, always thinking I was better than everyone. My uncle had died years ago, struggling with depression and addiction, and my family had never talked about him. Apparently, my dad had been comparing me to him my entire life. Suddenly, a twisted kind of logic clicked into place. The next day, my mom sent a group text announcing an emergency family meeting that evening. Attendance was mandatory for everyone, including extended relatives. I almost ignored it, but decided to show up one last time to face them all. I arrived late, and the living room was packed with family. Everyone fell silent as I walked in, the tension thick enough to cut. My dad started with a speech about family unity and how important it was to present a united front for business dealings. He painted me as a traitor who had betrayed sacred family trust by meeting with the developers alone. Several relatives nodded along, buying into the narrative. My mom took over next, sobbing about how the situation was destroying the family and how she'd always wanted what was best for me. But I'd made selfish choices that hurt everyone. Classic manipulation, but I wasn't buying it anymore. My sister jumped in, talking about how her kids needed their college funds that depended on this sale, and my brother bragged about plans for his share. I sat there silently, listening to the excuses and blame. When my dad finally asked me to speak, I stood and connected my phone to the TV. I played the video from Christmas in full. The insults, the beer can, the bat, the humiliation. The room went dead silent, the ugly truth exposed for everyone to see and hear. Then I played clips of their desperate voicemails and showed screenshots of texts filled with manipulation and threats. I revealed the trust fund they'd hidden from me for 7 years, the money meant for Mason that they kept secret. Several relatives looked shocked, some even openly crying. My grandma wiped tears away, and even my siblings shifted uncomfortably. I explained that I wasn't blocking the sale. It was still happening. I laid out the deal I'd made with the developers, the memorial for Grandpa, the naming of the resort after Mason, and the fair distribution of money to everyone. I told them that while I hadn't taken money from anyone, I wouldn't let them erase Mason's rights anymore. I looked directly at my parents and told them this was never about the money for me. It was about years of being treated like a disappointment, about humiliation and lies, about them thinking they could discard me and expect favors when they needed something. My dad tried to interrupt, but my grandma shushed him, something I'd never seen before. I finished by announcing 2 things. First, I was taking full control of Mason's trust fund, and all future communications about my son would go through me, not them. Second, once the sale went through, I planned to use part of my share to start a small foundation in memory of my uncle, focusing on mental health support for young adults. That last announcement hit my mom hard. She gasped and had to sit down. I left without waiting for a response. As I walked out, a few cousins, including Danny, followed me and apologized for not standing up for me sooner. The sale went through 3 days later, and the money was transferred directly to my account, just as I demanded. The developers even sent Mason a small model of what the resort would look like with his name on it. He thought it was the coolest thing ever. Since the family meeting, my parents have been eerily quiet, and my siblings have sent tentative texts, suddenly wanting to repair things now that the money was in hand. It's too late for that. Mason and I spent the weekend at a theme park, and for the first time in months, I saw him laugh without fear or worry. He asked if we could visit Grandma and Grandpa soon. I had to explain that probably wouldn't happen for a very long time, if ever. He thought about it, then said something that stopped me cold. That's okay. They weren't very nice anyway. Kids understand more than we give them credit for. The foundation paperwork is being processed now, and already some relatives from my mom's side have reached out wanting to contribute or get involved. Turns out, many remembered my uncle but never talked about him because my parents basically erased him from our family history. As for my parents, I heard through Danny that they're selling the house, the one they remortgaged twice, and downsizing. They even gave up their country club memberships. Actions have consequences, and theirs are finally catching up. I don't know if I'll ever speak to them again. Part of me is still angry, but mostly, I just feel free. Free from their judgment, their cruelty, and the role of family disappointment. The resort is set to break ground next month, and Mason and I will be there for the ceremony. My parents won't be invited. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't some elaborate plan or bitter grudge. Sometimes, it's simply standing up for yourself, taking control of your life, and watching others face the consequences of their own actions. Just when I thought I'd seen the worst of this nightmare and finally had control of the situation, something unexpected landed on my doorstep that threw everything back into chaos. A plain, unmarked envelope arrived in the mail one chilly March morning, and inside was a letter from someone anonymous, a person who claimed to know secrets about my grandfather's will, secrets that could change everything I thought I knew. The letter suggested that the will had been tampered with in the final days before my grandfather passed away, that the Lake House Trust wasn't as straightforward as my family had led me to believe. The writer included photocopies of what looked like original documents and some handwriting analysis, hinting that a last-minute amendment had been forged. If what they said was true, then my share of the lake house might not be as large as I'd been told. Or worse, I could be completely excluded from the trust. My mind raced through every possibility. Was this some cruel family trick to undermine me again? Or was there actually more to this tangled mess than I'd uncovered? I spent that day rereading the documents and cross-checking everything with Ethan, the real estate lawyer. He agreed the letter raised serious questions, and he urged me to prepare for a new legal battle. The timing couldn't have been worse, especially with the resort development already moving forward and Mason's future seemingly secure. But I knew I couldn't ignore this. If there was a chance my family had pulled one last deception, I owed it to myself and Mason to find the truth. That evening, I took Mason to the park near the lake, the same place where our family had spent so many summers before all this madness began. As we walked along the shore, Mason spotted a small plaque I'd never noticed before. It was worn and nearly hidden behind some bushes, but it was dedicated to my grandfather and mentioned the lake house as a place meant to bring family together. Mason looked up at me and asked why it felt like so much of our family history had been kept a secret. I sat down beside him and told Mason that sometimes people hold on to things that don't belong to them, and sometimes families break in ways that are hard to fix. But I promised him that no matter what happened, we'd build our own legacy, one built on honesty, love, and respect. That moment made me realize something important. The money and property mattered, sure, but the real legacy was the chance to rebuild what had been broken. Maybe not with my family, but with the people who truly cared about us. In the days that followed, I began quietly investigating the claims from the anonymous letter, consulting experts, and digging into archives. It felt like walking through a minefield of lies and half-truths, but I was determined to get to the bottom of it. Every piece of evidence I uncovered only made me more certain that the story I'd been told wasn't the whole truth. The deeper I went, the more complicated it became. Meanwhile, Mason and I started focusing on our future, putting the past behind us as best we could. The foundation and memory of my uncle was starting to take shape, and a few relatives from my mom's side had reached out, wanting to help with mental health support for young adults. That brought me a small sense of peace amid the storm. Mason's laughter returned, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. But the shadow of the letter lingered. I wasn't sure if I was ready for another family battle, especially one that could drag us through courts and scandals. The choice felt impossible: fight to protect what I thought was mine, or let go and accept that some wounds never fully heal. I thought about all the years of hurt, humiliation, and betrayal, and I wondered if I had the strength to endure more. One night, as Mason slept, I sat alone in my apartment staring at the documents again. I knew that whatever I decided would change the course of our lives forever. Was it worth reopening wounds that might never close? Could I protect Mason from the fallout? Or was this the fight I had to have, no matter the cost? The answers didn't come easy, but one thing was clear: I wasn't the same scared kid I used to be. I was a man who had faced his family's worst and survived. In the end, I realized that true strength wasn't about holding on to land or money. It was about choosing who you let into your life and what kind of father you wanted to be for Mason. The lake house might be a symbol of family history, but our future was ours to write. No matter what the legal battle brought, I knew I'd protect Mason from the toxicity and build a life where he could thrive. That's where the story stands now. The documents sit on my desk, waiting for my next move, and the future feels uncertain but hopeful. I'm sharing this not for sympathy or answers, but because sometimes life throws you curveballs that force you to redefine what family really means. For me, it's not about blood or property. It's about love, resilience, and standing up for the people who matter most. And Mason? He's the reason I keep fighting. The reason I'll never let anyone make him feel unwanted or unloved again. The lake house might be tied up in shadows, but our story is just beginning. And this time, I'm writing it on my own terms.